The chapter that we're going to look at in personal law today is chapter 1, and the title of that is What is Law? We know that in our society that people always don't maintain the standard and the expectation that we'd sometimes like them to maintain. So we need rules and regulations that are made by the government and enforced by the government in order to assure that those conducts are working in our society. So when we talk about laws actually come from 6 different sources. All right, the first one is constitutional law. That's the one that is a law that we'll spend a couple of days now looking at and reviewing. Another form of law is statutory law, rules and regulations made by different government entities. Administrative law would be the third one, that are made by some of our elected officials, which are assigned to be kind of specialists in each one of the areas of law. Common law is judge-made case law that has been handed down from history. Law of equity would be a situation of a court order or an injunction. And finally, executive order. And we spent a little bit of time talking about that in the last couple of days. So when laws are created, they're not just created without some type of justification or rationale. But when laws come into place, they generally reflect the values of our people or the values of society. So the values are the center of this spoke when a law is actually created. One of the laws that might be created is a reflection of our moral values. And we'll talk more specifically about some examples of each one of these as we go through. Laws are sometimes created to reflect our economic values. Many times we have laws put into place that are a reflection or a support of our political values. And finally, laws that are reflective of our social values. So let's go back to moral values, and let's take a look at that to start out with. So moral issues would be situations that are kind of a hot topic sometimes in society. So Roe versus Wade, the abortion issues. Some people are in support of, some people are in disagreement with the Roe versus Wade abortion law. That law is put into place and affects people based on their moral values, whether you believe abortion is right or it's wrong. War and taking somebody's lives. We have laws in our country that say it's illegal for you to take someone's life, but at the same time, we go overseas or we defend our United States with war situations where we know we're killing people, that we're taking people out, and that's a reflection of a moral value. I apologize for the phone that keeps ringing while I'm trying to record this, so kind of ignore that. I'm trying to as well. The death sentence. That's a reflection of a moral value. In Minnesota, we don't have a death sentence, but some states do. So the moral opinion of the people in those states differs from one to the other. And then, of course, we're hearing more and more about gay marriage and equal rights regardless of sex. And that's a moral value as well, where some states have adopted recognizing males and females as not being as different as we normally would classify them. When you look at an economic value, we have laws in place that encourage people to accumulate wealth. An example would be if you own your own home, there are some economic benefits to that. There's some tax benefits, you get some write-offs, you have some economic opportunities that someone who rents an apartment or rents a house don't have. We also have, from an economic value, the protection from wrongdoing. So let's say that we buy a product from a company that's harmful or hurts us. We have laws put into place that will protect us and encourage companies to make products that are safe. And if they're not safe, we have a right to have some financial advantages through lawsuits or whatever if we're injured due to a company's negligence in manufacturing or designing that product. And also we have laws that are put into place that provide penalties for people that fail to pay taxes. Because in order for our economy to operate the way it needs to, many times we use taxpayer dollars to do that. When we look at political values, political value encourages people to serve in public office. to serve from, it might be a board member to a city councilman to a mayor to a leader of a party to a governor to a judge, or even up to a situation where it could be the President of the United States. All right, so political participation is encouraged, and that's a reflection of the way our country operates, is that we want the voice of the people and we want representation from people in that political process. We have a huge emphasis on voting. I think we saw that this year probably more than ever with the Trump election. We saw more young people out voting than maybe ever before. But there are also some requirements for the political process. And one of those is if you're going to be president of the U.S., you need to be a U.S.-born citizen. And for different political positions, there may be some age requirements that are also applied to those offices. And finally, our social values. Social values are what we just in general as a society feel is important. And one of those is a free public education. You're here today because your taxpayer dollars are paying for your education. Now, if you were going to a school like across the street at St. Bernard's, that's not free. The people that choose to send their children to the private schools, they have to pay the cost of that education, because as it sits now, that's not a public education, that's a private education. That may change now with the new political people in office, but we'll see what that happens. But as of now, free public education is a reflection of our social value. Equality for males and females. We like to say that there's equality, but there really isn't. Females are still at a disadvantage. In many cases, they're not treated as equally as females. Although we've worked towards that, we're still not there. There's still plenty of discrimination. And so our social value needs to be, continue to be worked on to make that an even playing field. And kind of the same with the rights of minorities. I don't think our minority population sometimes has the same advantages that the Caucasian people do, and that's maybe a personal opinion in some cases. I think it's right, in other cases maybe not. But I still think with both women's and minority rights, there's some things we need to work on as a country to be better. So when we look at a topic of human rights, everybody, regardless of who you are and where you live, has the right, just by being born in the U.S., to have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you're male, female, what color you are, where you live. That's a standard by which we in the United States believe is a right that everyone should have, and live with the dignity and respect, and to have this apply to anybody, anywhere. That's a little different than in the foreign countries. All right. So that's why a human right is a given, born right that everybody has, regardless of whatever situation they might be in. Now, for everything to work properly, and for all these pieces of that wheel I showed you earlier to really fall into place, there needs to be a balance. Okay, and the balance means that everybody has a right, but it's balanced with a responsibility. If everybody exercised their right along with the responsibility, then I think society would work in a little bit better fashion. When one outweighs the other and we kind of get out of balance, then we sometimes run into a lot of issues. So as talking about the laws and the way laws are put into place and enforced in our society, we have to look at the fact that laws fall into two major groups. Laws can be created that are criminal laws, and those would include the four that are listed, with the most serious classification of criminal law being first, that being a felony, followed by a gross misdemeanor, and infractions. All right. So a law that is classified into any one of those areas would be considered a criminal law. And then we also have the civil laws. Now, civil laws are different categories. There's a variety of different ones that we'll look at. But those fall into classifications of violations that are wrongs against individuals rather than society. So a crime is an act against a person for which a punishment is provided. A civil law is a wrong against an individual for which some kind of compensation typically is provided. So there's a little bit of a difference in how those are handled. We're going to start out by looking at today constitutional law, okay? Because the constitutional law is considered to be the supreme law of the land. It's those principles that have been set forth by the government with the aim to have these laws protecting everybody in our society. And it is considered to be the kind of overseeing or supreme law of the land. So if you think of it as an umbrella, it's the big umbrella over our country, okay? No state can have a law that conflicts with the Constitution. So a state can have a law that is more restrictive than the Constitution, but yet states can have laws that maybe differ and be less restrictive than the Constitution. And we'll talk about that a little bit. Of the constitutional amendments, which there are 27 of them today, the first 10 are called the 10 Amendments, or referred to as the Bill of Rights. And those are the 10 that we have a tendency to see and look at and probably have applied to us more often than the rest. The whole study of this topic that we're talking about here in this class, the study of law itself, is called jurisprudence. Jurisprudence is the study of all legal principles combined, whether it's civil, criminal, the courts, doesn't matter. That whole discussion and topic of law, the study of that is jurisprudence. Within the framework of laws that are created, there are some divisions of power. And this is, again, to help us have the balance. So within our divisions, the framework that is set up is there's an executive branch, there's a legislative branch, and there's also a judicial branch. So to make all of these parts and have checks and balances in place, these work independently, but they're designed to kind of check on one another and prevent one from being too powerful. So when we look at each of those areas, the executive branch, that would be the president, and any federal agencies, any federal offices, they make up the executive branch. The legislative branch, that would be the Congress. So the Senate, House of Representatives, these elected people that we put into office from the federal level and the state level would make up the would make up the legislative branch. And the judicial is the court system. So anything that would involve federal, district, county, all of those courts, that would be classified as the judicial powers. So each one of those is designed to work within themselves, to monitor, control themselves, but at the same time, to work in conjunction of the whole legal system. The others are kind of part of that whole lawmaking process that keeps that check and balance in place. We also have something in our government called federalism, and federalism is where there's a limited power of the Constitution. And this is what makes some of those differences among laws that are created from state to state. Okay? So North Dakota may have a law that is different than Minnesota. Colorado might have a law that's different than Minnesota. In fact, Colorado has a law that's different from the federal law that applies to illegal use of drugs. Okay? We have a federal law that says it's illegal to have or to possess marijuana. Well, Colorado was the first to pass legislation to allow recreational use of marijuana to be legal. Okay, they can do that because it falls under that classification of federalism to allow differences in lawmaking. So how do you change a constitution and a constitutional amendment? It doesn't happen very often. And generally, states are allowed to make changes within their state more often than we have constitutional changes. As you could see in an earlier slide, 93 was the last time we had a constitutional amendment that was actually changed. But the process is fairly lengthy. It takes an approved vote of 2/3 of the House and the Senate. It could be changed at a convention, although that doesn't happen, very, very often, by 2/3 of the states. But in either case, that has to be ratified by 3/4 of the states. So about 38 states have to approve that kind of a change. So you don't see many changes in Constitution. It's the supreme law of the land. It's been there for many, many years. And as we take a look at these constitutional amendments, you're going to see that they've been around here for a long time. So what we're going to look at today for a class activity, I'm going to ask you to review the 10 Bill of Rights. And I want you to go through and paraphrase what those are and kind of what they mean. And then I want you to look at each of those, and I'd like you to identify which one you think is the most important. Now that's sometimes hard to do because all of them have situations where they apply to our life. But I'd like you to evaluate the situation and have you tell me which one of those you think is more important than the other. When you look at those constitutional amendments, they're enumerated, 1 to 10. The numbering means nothing. It doesn't mean that number 1 is more important than number 24. Okay, so when we look at the top 10, it doesn't mean that 1 is more important than 10. It just means that's the way they're numbered. What I want you to do is to tell me, of those 10, which one do you think is most important, and justify your answer as to why.